Welcome to Hebraic Insights in the Gospels. Join us every Sabbath on Zion Road Radio for a look at the life, deeds, and words of Yeshua Messiah and his followers from the Torah-centric Hebraic perspective they were originally lived and written in.
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it, and you find rest for your souls. You find rest for your souls. Oh, you find rest for your souls when you walk in his way.
Today's program is on Luke chapter 21, verse 25 through verse 38. What is the biblical way of escape from the Great Tribulation? What does Messiah mean to be watchful all the time? And what does it mean to be counted worthy to escape? And what can we do now to be counted worthy? Stay tuned throughout today's program for Eliyahu ben David's insight on these questions and more in Luke chapter 21, verse 25 through verse 38. And now, here's today's scripture portion. Messiah is speaking, continuing his prophecy from the first part of Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 21, verse 25 through verse 38. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and on the earth anxiety of nations. In perplexity, for the roaring of the sea and the waves. Men fainting for fear and for expectation of the things which are coming on the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is near. He told them a parable. See the fig tree and all the trees? When they are already budding, you see it and know by your own selves that the summer is already near. Even so, you also, when you see these things happening, know that the kingdom of Elohim is near. Most certainly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all things are accomplished. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. So be careful, or your hearts will be loaded down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life. And that day will come on you suddenly. For it will come like a snare on all those who dwell on the surface of all the earth. Therefore, be watchful all the time, praying that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will happen and to stand before the Son of Man. Every day Yeshua was teaching in the temple, and every night he would go out and spend the night on the mountain that is called Olivet. All the people came early in the morning to him in the temple to hear him. And now, here's Eliyahu on that portion.
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it, and you find rest for your souls. You find rest for your souls. Oh, you find rest for your souls when you walk in his way.
Shabbat Shalom, friends. Picking up where we left off in the book of Luke, chapter 21. And our theme is the coming of the Son of Man. Be watchful. And we have great anticipation about this because while this has been in the scriptures for 2,000 years, we are the generation in which this is going to be happening. And these words were especially written for us here in these last days. We do have need to be watchful. So we want to really understand what Yeshua was telling us there in Luke 21. And I think we're all going to understand this better as we look at it very carefully. And surely these words deserve our careful attention. Well, we're going to look some more now into these verses in Luke 21. I want to especially look at the last section, the section that is a warning, where Yeshua is telling us what we need to do during these times. He says, be careful, or your hearts will be loaded down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that day will come on you suddenly, for it will come like a snare on all those who dwell on the surface of all the earth. Therefore, be watchful all the time, praying that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will happen and to stand before the Son of Man. Well, this is very interesting, this concept of escape. This means to flee out. That's how you escape, by fleeing out. And we're going to talk about that a little more. It's interesting that these verses that we just read are quoted by some of the pre-trib rapture teachers. For instance, right on the top of this book by Tim LaHaye, he has this question, will you escape the tribulation? Then he has the big word rapture. So when you look at that, what is he saying? He's saying that the rapture is the way to escape the tribulation. My question would be, is there a biblical foundation for this claim? Is a pre-tribulation rapture a way of escape from the Great Tribulation? Now, on doing a search on escape, here's what I found. 0, zilch, zip, nil, not, none, 0. This is the number of times that the Bible says the rapture will occur before the Great Tribulation. There is 0 times. But 0 is also the number of times the Bible says the rapture will offer escape from the Great Tribulation. There is not a single verse that says the rapture will offer an escape from the Great Tribulation. Truth be told, it says that the rapture will happen after the Great Tribulation. But that's another discussion. Now let's compare this with the real way of escape. At least 7. The number of Bible passages that specifically say the remnant will escape. Now this is really interesting, isn't it? So if you're looking for scriptural support for the idea of escape, there is no scriptural support for the idea that the people of God will escape the tribulation by the rapture. But there are at least 7 verses that indicate the remnant will escape. And we're going to look at them all. Here's the first one. For out of Jerusalem a remnant will go out, and out of Mount Zion those who shall escape. The zeal of Yahweh will perform this. Here's number 2. For out of Jerusalem a remnant will go forth, and survivors will escape at Mount Zion. The zeal of Yahweh of hosts will perform this. It's basically the same verse, isn't it? And apparently important enough to repeat it again. 3. Yet will I preserve a remnant, in that you shall have some that escape the sword among the nations when you are scattered through the countries. Ezekiel 6:8. Come, flee from the land of the north, says Yahweh, for I have spread you abroad as the four winds of the sky, says Yahweh. Come, Zion, escape, you who dwell with the daughter of Babylon. Now, it doesn't say the word remnant here, but since it says, I have spread you abroad as the four winds of the sky, and other verses say that those who are spread abroad as the four winds of the sky are the remnant, I included this verse. And it does specifically say escape. And a lot of these verses mention Zion as well. Now, we have 3 more Bible passages to make up the full 7, which specifically say the remnant of Israel will escape the judgment of destruction coming upon the nations of the world. In other words, they include that in the passage as well. Here's those 3. This is Isaiah 10:20 through 23. It will come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel, those who have escaped of the house of Jacob, will no more again lean on him who struck them, but shall lean on Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. A remnant will return, even the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty Elohim. For though your people Israel are like the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them will return. A destruction is determined, overflowing with righteousness. For Yahweh, Yahweh of hosts, will make a full end, and that determined in the midst of all the earth. Now, granted, it doesn't use the term great tribulation here, but I certainly think destruction, which makes a full end in the midst of all the earth, qualifies as the great tribulation. So in this, it includes all of these thoughts: the remnant of Israel, escaping, and the destruction, all together in this passage. Here's our 6th example. This is from the book of Obadiah. For the day of Yahweh is near all the nations, but in Mount Zion there will be those who escape, and they will be holy. The house of Jacob will possess their possessions. The house of Jacob will be a fire, the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau a stubble. There will not be any remaining to the house of Esau. Indeed, Yahweh has spoken. So the day of Yahweh is the day in which he finally judges the nations. So this is synonymous with the Great Tribulation. It mentions those in Mount Zion. We've already read a number of verses that say that those in Mount Zion are the remnant, those in Mount Zion who escape. And it also mentions the house of Jacob, which is Israel. So all of this is together in this one passage. And then, of course, we have Joel chapter 2. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of Yahweh comes. It will happen that whoever will call on the name of Yahweh shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be those who escape, as Yahweh has said, among the remnant, those whom Yahweh calls. So this passage pulls all of this together, the great and terrible day of Yahweh. I don't think anybody would disagree with me that that's the Great Tribulation. We have Mount Zion as the place where the remnant will escape, those whom Yahweh calls. So, while you have no foundation for a pre-trib rapture as the place of escape, we have 7 witnesses here from the prophets that the remnant will escape by returning to their land. And this includes or is about the great and terrible day of Yahweh, or the Great Tribulation. So when we look at the prophets and what they talked about, and we compare that to what Yeshua was talking about in Luke 21, we find that Yeshua was expounding on the words of the prophets and laying out the signs of the end. Looking back in the prophets, we have all these things about the fig tree that help us to understand what Yeshua was saying. Well, the rest of this, which is really talking about an escape, is also drawing from these prophets who talked about the escape of the remnant in the final days. In Joel, we just read that the sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of Yahweh comes. And Yeshua is talking about signs in the sun, moon, and stars, certainly including these signs of Joel that he gave us. Also mentioning that the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Again, drawing from Joel. But let's talk about this idea of these signs in the sun, moon, and stars. Well, we do remember this, right? Before 2014, there was a lot of talk about the tetrad moons. In 2013, rather than just talking about the tetrad moons, I also included what had led up to the tetrad moons, which were Star of David planetary alignments. These were alignments of the stars actually forming the shape of the Star of David. And there were 13 of these that preceded the tetrad moons. Now, the tetrad moons were 4 blood red moons. These occurred over 2 years, 2014, 2015. At Passover, which is always during the full moon time, and Sukkot, which also begins at the full moon time, each of those 2 years. So that was rather amazing that that would happen. Well, in 2015, we were all kind of amazed when the Messiah star showed up. And it's worth talking about again, because the thing about the Messiah star, this was a conjunction of planets that, when seen from the earth, appeared to be one big bright star, a very, very bright star. Now, when you look through a telescope, you don't see that because these planets are very close to one another, and they all blur together into one big star when you look at it with a human eye. But through a telescope, of course, you can see these as specific planets. But certainly, in the year Yeshua was born, which is 2 BC, when they saw this bright star in the sky, brighter than any star in the sky, they knew that this was significant. The Gospels talk about it, and this was indeed a sign. Of course, those believers back then, Israel back then, kept the Shabbats according to the lunar calendar. And the Messiah star, or called sometimes the Bethlehem star, occurred at the Sabbath right in the middle of the Passover full moon Sabbath and the Sukkot full moon Sabbath. It's exactly in the middle after 12 Sabbaths, and it's the 13th Sabbath, and then there are 12 more Sabbaths. So clearly this is not, by any stretch of the imagination, an accident, and that this should repeat again. And even be true to this Sabbath pattern is pretty amazing that this should happen in 2015. So that's how this worked. So in retrospect, putting this all together, we have these signs. We have these 13 Star of David planetary alignments. We have this followed by the tetrad moons, and right in the middle of the last two tetrad moons, we have the Messiah star, which itself is the 13th Sabbath. What are the odds against this happening by accident? And by the way, this only has its full meaning to those of us who keep the lunar Sabbath. The people who don't, this timing isn't going to work out this way. This is meant to talk to us because we understand it. Does that make sense to you? These are signs that mean something to the remnant. I think that's a pretty amazing sign that involves the sun, moon, and stars, just like Yeshua talked about. And what does it mean? Well, this is not the main point of my discussion, but when we look at what happened in 2015, it's pretty amazing, because right around the time of the Messiah star is when the fifth seal was removed. And what that meant was a loosing of global persecution on believers around the world. And what the Messiah star itself is talking about is the same thing that the Star of Bethlehem was talking about. The Star of Bethlehem was announcing a baby coming into the world, baby Messiah coming into the world. And the Messiah star of 2015 was announcing the baby Messiah, that is the body of Messiah, being birthed in the earth. That is the remnant of Israel in their very beginnings. You know, the interesting thing about the Bethlehem star and the baby Yeshua being born is that to most people, while looking at the star seemed amazing, they didn't have any idea of what it meant. Most people had no idea. And it was soon forgotten. Interestingly, the same thing happened in 2015. There was a little bit about it in the media, but it was all soon forgotten. And all of these other things, these planetary alignments and the tetrads, were all meant to focus attention on the Messiah star. And all the people that wrote books about the tetrads, they totally missed it. The whole Christian world, they totally missed it. None of them have a clue that that is what this is really pointing to. The birth of the remnant nation in the world. That's pretty amazing, I think, and it's an amazing sign. So I wanted to share about it. And we do have a lot in that on the seminar from 2015, by the way, on the beasts of Daniel surfacing. We have that still for free, so please share that with others. Well, moving on from that, I want to talk about this term, all the earth. Yeshua uses this term, those who dwell on the surface of all the earth. What does that mean? If it says it will come like a snare on all those who dwell on the surface of all the earth, doesn't that mean everybody? Doesn't that mean you? That it's going to come like a snare on you? No, it doesn't mean that. When you read it, it seems to mean that. But I'm going to tell you why it doesn't mean that. It means, well, I'm going to tell you what it means. All of the prophets who use this term held those who dwell on the earth as one group and the remnant as a different group. So this is prophetic language. It's kind of interesting. For instance, in Isaiah 10, Yahweh, Yahweh of hosts, will make a full end, and that determined in the midst of all the earth. Obadiah, in Mount Zion there will be those who escape, and they will be holy. It says all the nations, for the day of Yahweh is near all the nations. So it's holding all the earth and all the nations in contrast to the escaped remnant. Now we do have some other verses like this too. We have the book of Revelation. Revelation 3:10, it says, because you kept my command to endure, I also will keep you from the hour of testing, which is to come on the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. The next verse, it talks about Yahweh judging those who dwell on the earth. In Revelation 8:13, it talks about woe for those who dwell on the earth. Look at all the other verses in Revelation that essentially calls those who dwell on the earth the bad guys. Here it's very clear, Revelation 17:8, those who dwell on the earth and whose names have not been written in the book of life. So when we look at all of this, we see that those who dwell on the earth, or some derivative of that, is used in at least 12 places in Revelation to refer to the wicked world, which is the vast majority of those who dwell on the earth in the literal sense, in contrast to the overcomers who escape the judgments of Yahweh. So when we read Yeshua using this same term, those who dwell on the surface of all the earth, he is speaking in the same prophetic language as the prophets used, as we find later in the book of Revelation. Those who dwell on the surface of the earth in the prophetic context are the bad guys, the wicked people, those not written in the book of life. And it uses the term in contrast to the remnant who escape. So that's the way in which Yeshua is using the term there in Luke 21. Consistently, he spoke of escape by the remnant in the remnant Exodus. Now, this tells you something. This tells you that if people think they're going to escape by going to Montana and building a little cabin out in the middle of the woods, good luck with that. That's not the way of escape that Yahweh has set forth or that Yeshua is talking about. You think that maybe you can go to an even more remote place, maybe Alaska, maybe the North Pole, perhaps one of the uninhabited islands somewhere. I'm pretty sure all of those are included in all the earth. There's one place of escape that's offered in the scriptures during the Great Tribulation. And that's the place that Yahweh brings the remnant to. There really is no other. So in Luke 21, 34 through 36, we now consider these verses. Therefore, be watchful all the time, praying that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will happen and to stand before the Son of Man. Now, we want to look at these words closer. One thing we want to realize here is he's talking about being counted worthy to escape. Now, if you were a believer in the pre-trib rapture, you might find that wording troubling. Because most people who believe in the pre-trib rapture believe that as soon as they said the sinner's prayer, they were at peace with God, and that without works, just by his grace. So the whole idea of being counted worthy to escape really doesn't fit those people who think that they're going to escape by means of a pre-trib rapture. Actually, everything they believe about the pre-trib rapture is contrary to these words. Why does anybody have to be watchful if one day all of the believers are just going to be snatched out? This doesn't depend on them at all, does it? So why not just go on with your life, doing all the stuff Yeshua says not to do here? Just focusing on your own life. Why not do that if one day you're just going to be snatched away? And what about being counted worthy? Doesn't being counted worthy involve works? Christians don't believe in works, do they? So this is a very strange passage, I think, for your nominal Christian believers who would follow the idea of a pre-trib rapture. This is not the kind of language you would expect from Tim LaHaye if he wrote the verse, is it? And another thing I find interesting is Yeshua breaks this down into two things. Did you notice that? The first thing is be watchful all the time, praying that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will happen. So that's not just talking about the end, is it? It's talking about all these things that will happen, all these things that are going to be coming on the earth, to escape that, be counted worthy to escape that, and to stand before the Son of Man. It's interesting it doesn't use the word escape for that, right? It doesn't use the word escape to stand before the Son of Man. It's just saying escaping all these things that will happen. Doesn't that fit the prophetic scenario of the remnant escaping to their land before the destruction comes? See what I'm saying? You don't have to mess with the terminology at all in order for it to fit perfectly with what the prophet said about the remnant. But you do have to kind of mangle your thoughts here if you're going to make this apply to a pre-trib rapture. Okay, so let's look at this a little more. What does it mean to be watchful all the time? And what does it mean to be counted worthy to escape? To be counted worthy means just what it sounds like. To deem entirely deserving. Deserving. Now, does deserving involve works? It does. Because you see, what this is talking about is not salvation. There will be many saved believers who nonetheless will not be counted worthy of escaping with the remnant. That doesn't mean that they're not believers, but it means they were sleeping at the wheel. They weren't doing what Yeshua said to do. They weren't being watchful. Let me ask you a real question. How many believers have you ever spoken to that said that they were praying that they would escape all these things that were going to come by returning home in the second Exodus? Is that a prayer that you often have heard during the course of your life as a believer? Let alone being watchful for that event so you can be ready and be a part of it. So I think at a very minimum, to be counted worthy, would be to acknowledge this truth, which means you have to seek it out in the first place, and to be watchful as to where and when it's happening, and to be deserving. In other words, to be an earnest disciple of Yeshua Messiah. I mean, wouldn't that be kind of like the minimum level that one would expect? According to the study that was done in America of what people talk about, including Christians, there's very little talk about God, Messiah, or anything spiritual. People are doing exactly what Yeshua here is saying not to do. They are totally consumed by their own concerns and their own lives. Realize that the remnant are a special group of people. They are the overcomers. They are the ones that rise above that level of mediocrity. And to be counted worthy means essentially they have passed that test that we find in the first 3 chapters of Revelation. In Revelation 3:10, Messiah said this, addressing the overcomers, because you kept my command to endure, I also will keep you from the hour of testing, which is to come on the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. I don't think he could say it any plainer. Because you kept my command to endure. Where do we find Messiah's command to endure in the Scriptures? Do we not find it in the Olivet Sermon? Isn't this where he says, he who endures to the end is the one that will be saved? Doesn't he say that? Is this a command to endure to the end? Apparently, he thinks so. And so he says, because you kept my command to endure. I don't think by endure he means just surviving, does he? Because whoever's alive at that point, including those who dwell on the earth, will have survived to that point. It's not just surviving, but it is maintaining a vital relationship with him and keeping his commands, obeying him, which means to be a true disciple of his. He says, if you do that, he says, I will also keep you from the hour of testing, which is to come on the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. What is the hour of testing that comes to those who dwell on the earth? Is it not the Great Tribulation? This verse is really saying to the overcomers, you will be included in the remnant exodus before the Great Tribulation. If you pull together all of the prophetic verses we just looked at, that's what he's saying. That's what he's saying. If you keep my commands and endure, then you will be part of that group that is kept from the hour of testing. That's going to come to all the other people, those who dwell on the earth. 2 groups here. 2 groups. So what we see is it is the overcomers that will be counted worthy to escape. The people that are listening are not primarily the ones that I'm concerned about when I read this. Because for the most part, we know about these things and we can make a decision whether we are going to pay attention to this warning, whether we're going to obey Yeshua Messiah, and whether we're going to put his kingdom first in our life so that we can be included in the remnant exodus. We can do that because we're already in touch with this message. We already understand this. We already know what Yahweh is going to be doing in the very near future with the remnant. I'm really more concerned about the believers whom we have not reached yet. And I know that this is something, ultimately, that is up to Messiah. And I can see that just reading the verses, seeing what he had to say. Just the very term that you might be counted worthy to escape all these things. This suggests to me that there's a decision being made here about people, that Messiah is making a decision as to whether he counts them worthy or not. This all goes along with the first 3 chapters of Revelation. That's where he's talking about all this. And that he is making a decision about who is worthy, who's not worthy, who's an overcomer, who's not an overcomer. And that's a very weighty thing. I think it also explains why when you share these truths, even though we have so much scriptural evidence, that some people are just blind to it. They just can't see it. And no matter what you say, you can't convince them. Things that are so meaningful to you don't even ring a bell at all with them. And the reason for that is clear, that as of yet, they have not been counted worthy to escape. And it's probably for exactly the reasons Yeshua listed, of basically being preoccupied with their own lives and the things of the world, that he's not really first in their life. And, this can be somewhat of a deterrent to us because we can share the truth that we have, and when we get rejection from that, it might cause us to kind of shut down from doing it with other people. But the fact is, you don't know who's going to respond. And sometimes you can really be surprised. Just recently, I've had that experience. You just don't know. So I want to encourage all of you, as we are very, very rapidly heading towards the end of this age, be bold. Be bold. And share this truth with people. Give them an opportunity to respond to it, because really so much is at stake, and it is the overcomers that will be counted worthy to escape all these things.
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is.
You have been listening to Hebraic Insights in the Gospels. The scripture verses referenced in today's program are Luke chapter 21, verse 25 through verse 38, 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 31, Isaiah 37, verse 32, Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 8, Zechariah chapter 2, verse 6 through verse 7, Isaiah chapter 10, verse 20 through verse 23, Obadiah chapter 1, verse 15 through verse 18, Joel chapter 2, verse 31 through verse 32, Revelation chapter 3, verse 10, Revelation chapter 6, verse 10, Revelation chapter 8, verse 13, Revelation chapter 17, verse 8, and Revelation chapter 20, verse 2. Further teachings and study materials on the pre-trib rapture, the actual rapture at Messiah's return at the end of the Great Tribulation, the remnant of Israel, the remnant Exodus, the book of Revelation as it was meant to be understood from a Hebraic perspective, more end times Bible prophecy, works of faith, and preparing for the days ahead by improving your relationship with God, along with many other related topics, can be found at our membership site, Zion Tabernacle. Sign up is free. Just go to zion.net. That's TSIYON.NET. New programs on the Gospels will be airing every Sabbath on Zion Road Radio. Tune in next Shabbat to learn more from Hebraic insights in the Gospels. Shabbat Shalom!
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths.
The restoration of the remnant of Israel is one of the most undertaught, neglected, and unknown major events in Bible prophecy. A strange fact, since prophecies and references to this event can be found all throughout almost every major book of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. Now, Yahweh has raised up Zion Ministry to teach His remnant nation of Israel everything they need to know about this often neglected truth in His perfect timing. To learn who the remnant of Israel is, what the Zion mission is, and why we teach the things we do, go to our website at zion.org and click on Remnant Vision in the menu bar. That's TSIYON.org.